Before we move any further in the functionality of our to-do list application, let's go ahead and focus a little bit on the look and feel. Right now our application is pretty dang plain and pretty ugly. And we want to fix that before we go any further. Now, based on our mock-up we created of our application, we like to have a little bit of space between our to-do items so that they look a little bit better, so they're not all crammed together. And we might want to add a little bit of outline or some padding or margin, and then of course an outline on the list component. Which reminds me that we actually never implemented this list component. We have our display component, we have our app component, but we don't have this list component. So we might want to implement that as well, and then begin to talk about how do we style our React components so that they look good on the screen. Let's go ahead and let's implement our list view component first. So let's go over to our code here. And we can see here inside of our app, we actually kind of take care of our list component functionality. And we want to take this and pull it out of our app. We want our app component to be pretty much just our primary orchestrating component. We want it to be that primary parent component and not really have it deal with functionality within our app. So we're going to go ahead and, based on our mockup, implement this to-do list component. That way we can separate it from our create a to-do item component. And then of course this outer box will be our app component. So let's do that really quick. We got to-do item right here. And then let's go ahead and add a new folder. And let's make it our to-do list. And then inside of that folder, let's go ahead and create a new file. We'll call this to-do list.js. All right. Now we're going to follow the exact same pattern that we did here. We're going to import React, of course. That way we have access to React. And then we're going to do our functional component, and then we're going to export our default for it. Now let's talk about our to-do list really quick. Does our to-do list have any data of its own? Does it create data, make data, or really manage data of its own? And the answer is no. We're going to have the to-do list come from our app component. Our app component will pass us the to-do list just like we are passing the to-do item to our to-do item display. So let's go ahead and just make it a functional component. So again, a functional component is just a good old-fashioned JavaScript function. We're going to call this our to-do list, just like we did over here with our to-do item. We're going to make sure it takes in a props because we just specified that our app will pass the to-do list to the list display, and then the list display manages iterating over that list and passing each to-do item to the to-do item display. So let's go ahead and set up this function, and let's do our export defaults before we forget. Export default, and we are going to export the to-do list. To-do list, there we go. All right. Now if we look at our app.js, we're going to go ahead and change, or we're going to remove this functionality from our app.js component. So we'll cut that out, we'll move it into our to-do list. And then of course right now our app is the one that's returning our to-do components right here. So really we're just going to take this out, and then we're going to put it in as part of our return. Now if we look at our functional, it's a return, and then inside of an executable block, we're going to go ahead and return that JSX that makes up our component. Now we could just put our list right here, and it would work just fine, but usually in a component you want to have a root element that has a class on it so that you can style it. So here we're going to do to-do list as our style, and then I'm going to move that div down below the list. Let's go ahead and tab our list in. And now we've got our to-do list with all of our to-do list items that will show up inside of it. Now that we moved all of that, if we go to our application, let's go ahead and save this, save our app.js. If you notice, there was that big circle right there. Now we've got nothing in here. And if we explore or inspect the HTML, we can see that our root right here has our app in it, but it's just an empty div. So in order to get our to-do list in there, we need to go ahead and import our to-do list. So let's go ahead and do an import. Let's import the to-do list. And then we're going to import that from, it is of course a local file. So we'll go ahead and do components slash to-do list slash to-do list. Oops. And now we've got our to-do list. Now, one thing here is that you're going to see we're going to fail, and that is because inside of our to-do list, we are using a to-do item display component, but we never imported it because we had it imported inside of our app. So we can take this import right here, cut it out, because we're not actually going to use it here inside of our app anymore. We're now going to use it here inside of our to-do list. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. So now we have a to-do list item to use in here. Perfect. And with this, of course, our props is expecting or should expect a to-do items. And right now you'll see we get an error here because to-do items is not defined, and yet we're trying to use to-do items right here. Now, just like we did with this to-do items component, where we use that component and we can pass it a to-do so that it has that to-do inside of its props, we can pass the entire to-do list as a property of this props, or an attribute of this props object, so that we can access it down in here. So let's go back to our app, and we've got our dummy data right here called to-do items. And so we're going to go ahead and pass that to the to-do list, which we just pulled in right here. And we're going to pass it in as a property. So let's go down here, and inside of our app where we used to have all that code, we're going to go ahead and add a new component, React component right here. And then we're going to do our to-do list attribute. And we are going to go ahead and pass it our dummy data to-do list, which is this one right here. Go ahead and copy that, save ourselves some typing. Now, because we called this the to-do list as our attribute, well, let's change it to just to-dos. That way we know it's multiple to-dos, it is a list, and we're not using the same name as our component. So to-dos is what our attribute is going to be called on our props object. So now we've got a props, and so now we can change this to props.todos.map. And now each to-do that's in our to-dos list that came in through our props is now going to be passed to a new instance of the to-do item display. And then, of course, our to-do list is going to render that list right there. So let's go back to our app. Let's save these changes. Looks like our compiling failed, and it says module not found, can't resolve components to-do item display inside of our to-do list. So inside of our to-do list, we copied this directly from our app.js, but it's not in the same path. So we need to update this path right here. And so based on the path we're in, currently we're inside of the folder to-do list. We need to get outside of it so we can get into the to-do item to get to that to-do item list. So let's use the .. and let's go to to-do item, and then let's pull in that to-do item display. Now let's save it. It compiles without a problem. Go to our code, back to our UI, and we can see everything's in here. And if we explore the code under the root, we'll see our app, which is a div. We'll see our to-do list. This is new because we didn't have a div here before. We used to just have these to-do items. Well, now the to-do items are all wrapped inside of a to-do list, and then we have our app. So now with these class names that we have, we actually have the ability now to go ahead and begin to add some style to these and make them look better. And that's what we're going to jump in now that we have this to-do list component created. Now, if we follow the example of what we got when we did the create React app, and we see this app.css, and we open up our app.js, we can see that the CSS that will be used for this particular component, all we're doing is simply importing it using an import statement, and React takes care of making sure that app.css gets added to the head of our page. And here's where we saw those get added. And here's that app CSS right here that came with our app.js. You can see app-logo, app-header, and those styles are right there. So React will take any styles that are imported into our React components, and it will handle adding that style to the head of the HTML document. It makes it super easy for us so that we don't have to manage a bunch of CSS imports up here manually. React will take care of it automatically for us. So let's go ahead and let's not worry about styling the app since it's just our orchestrating component. And let's first style our to-do list. And let's just create a simple style to use for it. And so we're going to follow that same convention. We're going to go here to our to-do list folder. We're going to add a new file. We're going to follow the same naming convention. We got a to-do_list.css. And we follow that exact same pattern that we've got down here. And then inside of our to-do list, we're going to go ahead and import into it our CSS. And if we look at how the app did it, it just imports it without a name. There's no name. If you notice, when we're pulling in a module, we give it a name so that we can use that code. When we're importing CSS, we just import the file. So now we just need to do a / and then our to-do list should just be, I think we used a / where, let's see, / app CSS. So if we're in the same folder as our to-do list, we should be able to do / and then to-do_list. And then go ahead and terminate that with a semicolon. Looks like everything built without a problem. So let's go to our head. And then let's look and see if, all right, it hasn't been added yet. If you'll notice, we've got the one that comes with index.js, and we've got the one that comes from our app. That is because right now, our to-do CSS actually has nothing in it. So if we look at our component, our only class we have right now is the to-do list class. So let's go ahead and let's close the app.js so it's not in our way and the display. Let's go ahead and add a new class for to-do list. And let's add some styles to it, just like they do inside of the app CSS. We're going to go ahead and do that inside of our to-do list. And on this one, we're just going to go ahead and add ourselves a border. We're going to do 1 pixel solid. And then we are going to do, what color should we do? Let's just do black for now. Since we've got a white background, it should show up. Save that. Make sure everything is saved. To-do list is saved. Saved. Come back. Refresh our page. Let's check our head really quick. Let's see if our style was added. We've got our app style. Got our body style. But we don't see a style for our to-do list. So now the question is, why? Why are we not getting that when we followed a very similar pattern to this? So let's go back and double check. We've got import, and then we're doing / app.css because that is in the same folder location as our app.js. And then our to-do list right here, we are in the to-do list component file, and we have our CSS file inside of our to-do list. Now the question is, why isn't that working? And one of the things here is that React follows kind of a naming convention. And you can see that components actually have uppercase file names and uppercase style names. And we really haven't been doing that. So maybe we need to go about changing the way we are naming things and see if that helps. So I'm going to go ahead and rename my to-do list to to-do list. And then inside of my to-do list, it now copies and follows that same naming convention. And then I'm going to update my CSS as well. We'll rename it to, what is going on here? Move imports. Yes, let's go ahead and automatically update our imports. Definitely want our imports updated so we don't have to do it manually. Let's do to-do list again. All right. Now let's go to our, save that. Let's go to our to-do list, save that one. And now we should have our to-do list importing. And we've got our to-do list item right here. Looks like everything built without a problem. Now let's come back to our HTML. Let's come down here. There's our app style. Oops, it's not scrolling. There we go. Right. So there's our app. There's our index.js right there. And we don't have any other styles in here that are being imported. And it's not inside of either of these styles. So what could be causing the problem? This is where we try to debug what might be the problem. And we can see that there's no import down here of the style to give styles to our components. So let's finish what we were doing before. And let's go ahead and update our to-do list item as well so that we're following a proper naming convention. And so this is our to-do item display. Hit enter on that, to-do item display. And in here we should see that it's using the exact same naming convention. Everything's good on that. Let's go back to our to-do list and make sure that that import got updated. And we can see that it is now using the to-do item display. We got a to-do item display. We got our to-do list. All right. So it looks like we've got all of those updated. They're now following good naming conventions. So now we could ask ourselves, well, we used underscores on these. Would that cause a problem? The answer is no, because these are, of course, just paths within the website. They don't really have anything to do with the structure. But if we're going to follow the same naming convention that React does, we should probably go ahead and rename these file paths as well. And so let's just do to-do list. Make sure that gets updated. And then let's go ahead and update this one as well. Call this to-do item display. All right. And we should see all of our paths updated. To-do item display, to-do item display. And if we go to our app.js, we should see it pulling from, oh, it didn't update this one right here. So we need to update it to to-do list. Oh, it's not getting the right one. Let's do /components /to-do list /to-do list. Once we save that, we should see everything updated. Come back to our browser. We can see all of our items, but we're still not seeing our style. We've got the app style, we've got the body style, but nothing else. All right, so we've updated and we're following the same naming conventions that are in all of our other built-in components that we are given when the application was created with Create React App. Now the question is, why are our styles not being imported when we did our import here? Let's go ahead and close our app.js. And let's go back to our to-do list. And let's look at this really quick. We've got our import, and we are pulling in to-do list. And if we look at our app right here, we'll notice that it requires the .css. So when we're pulling in styles, because we're not pulling in actual JavaScript, in all of our components so far, and any time that we've used an import so far in React, we've noticed that we actually don't have to include the .js. So if we go here and we look at this, our to-do item display, we're importing from, and then we give the file path. But instead of doing the full file name where we're doing to-do item display.js, you can still do this. It will still compile and it'll still work, but it's implied that anytime you're doing a module import, it is going to be a JavaScript file that has this name. And it's just going to do the import, and you can see it all still works. When it comes to CSS, when we are importing CSS for our components, because by default it is not a JavaScript file, we need to specify that it is a CSS file. And that way, when React compiles this and it runs into this import, we can see, or React will be able to see, that this is actually a CSS file. And since we've specified the type of file it is, now the React compiler will handle this file correctly. So if we come back to our application and we look inside of the head of our document, we should see another style, and here it is, style. And we've got a .to-do list with a border of 1 pixel solid black. And here we can actually see that style coming in right here around this to-do list, and you can see it right here. Now it's full width, so it's going the full width of the page, and we'll constrain that when we add styles to our app to make sure that our app is actually right here in the center and only a certain width, just like in our mockup right here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's constrain the width of our app now that we've got our CSS working. So let's close our to-do list. Let's focus on our app. Let's go to our app.css. And inside of our app right here, we've got text align center. So that's going to put all the text in the middle. And we want to constrain our app. And if we look at our JSX, the root div that makes up our app has the class app on it. So inside of here, we're going to go ahead and do a width. We're going to set the actual width of the div. Let's do it to 300 pixels and see what that looks like. So we'll come back, go to our UI, and 300 pixels. It depends on how long our to-do title is as to whether or not we like that. And really, text align center we don't like, so let's center it left and see what happens. There we go. That's more like it, and we can put checkboxes in front of it as we begin to build it. Now, one thing here is that we actually want this to float in the middle of the screen. And there's an easy way to do that when we pull up, or we can do that with CSS. And so let's do a quick Google search for HTML center div on page. This right here, we should be able to see a really quick CSS rule for vertically and horizontally aligning a div in the center of a page. And right here we can see margin auto. So let's go ahead and give that a shot and see if we can get it to work. So let's do margin, and we'll do auto on our app component. Come back here, and there it is, right in the middle. Now you can see the top border is right up against the border of our browser. So let's go ahead and, just like in the example right here where it has a padding, let's add a padding to the top. Actually, we're going to add padding so that we have space between our to-do items and the border. And then we're going to add a top margin to get space between our browser top and the top of our app. So let's do that really quick. So margin auto, and then we're going to do a margin top. And we're going to set that margin top to, let's try 20 pixels and see what that looks like. And then we're going to add some padding in order to make sure that the content within our app has some space between it and our border. So let's do padding, and we'll just do 10 pixels on that. Save that, come back, reload, And we've got some space between the top of our app and the browser. And if we go ahead and click on this, we can look over here on our styles and come down here to our app. And it looks like padding, it really just added some space between our to-do list and our app. And the reality is we already added margin to the app itself, which brings it down. So maybe what we want to do is not do margin, definitely do a padding. So let's get rid of the margin. Let's stick with padding. Of course, we're just playing around with CSS right now, just so you can see how easy it is to begin styling your application, and definitely using your web developer tools to see how things are affected when you modify styles. And instead of modifying the styles here inside of your CSS and then reloading your website, you can actually just select the things that you are trying to modify and actually begin to adjust the styles in here till you get it the way you want, then copy those styles over. Now, with the padding in our app and our app set to be in the middle, really before we gave our border to our to-do list, not to our app. If we highlight our app, we can see we don't have a border on our app, but we do have a border on our to-do list. So let me show you how we can just go ahead and modify the CSS and see how things look before we copy it over. So let's do padding, and we're just going to do a general padding all the way around, and let's do 10 pixels. So that actually looks pretty good right there. So padding 10 pixels, and you can see where the padding is by the green highlight. I like that spacing, so let's just go ahead and add padding, but not to our app.js. Let's go here to our to-do list CS, and then let's go ahead and do our padding, and then I believe we did 10 pixels. Save that, come back, and on the reload, we now have the 10 pixel padding. And if we go back to our mockup, it's actually looking pretty good. Now let's come back here, and we've got our to-do list CSS. So let's come over here and let's do the same thing with our to-do list item. Add a new file, and let's add our to-do item display.css. And if we look at our to-do item JSX, we've got a to-do item display as our actual. Let's change this so it's more like a CSS style with hyphens instead of underscores. So to-do item display, we'll copy that in here and we'll make it a class. And now we've got this class for our to-do item display. And if we look at this a little bit, maybe we want a little bit more space between items. So let's do a little bit of margin. So let's do margin, and we will do 5 pixels. Save that, come back, let our page reload. Let's inspect one of these items. And if you notice, nothing happened. We don't even have a style for it. And that is because we need to come back to our to-do item display, and we need to import that CSS. Import. And then since we're not using it as a reference, we can do that. And then our to-do item display, semicolon, save it, come back, reload. Still no change. And we realize, oh, we forgot to specify the .css. Make sure we get the CSS in there. And now we see some padding in between these. So let's highlight one of those. And you can see based on the orange that there's a little bit of margin. Not padding, I think I said padding earlier, but margin. We can turn that on and off to see how it affects our UI. And with that margin, it looks a lot better. Now remember, when we use margin, it's going all the way around the entire item. And the reality is we don't need margin on the sides, and we only need margin on the top of our items. So let's modify this a little bit, and let's just say margin dash, we can either use bottom or top. Let's use top and see what happens. Moved our items back over. So now if we hover, we can see that the margin is just on the top. I actually don't like it on the top, because let's do bottom. So we're going to do margin bottom. I like that better. So we'll just do margin bottom and we'll do 5 pixels. Let's go back over here, margin dash bottom, and make it 5 pixels. Come back, let it reload, and it looks good. All right, the big things or the big takeaways from this is number 1, try to choose a naming convention and stick with it. We've been using sometimes underscores or snake case, and in other times we've been using camel case. When you're dealing with React, because the standard that people use is going to be this camel case, which is also a standard in JavaScript, but so is snake case. Pick one and stick with it instead of mixing in your application. Now, you'll find sometimes that I mix them because in JavaScript, usually you're using camel case. In Ruby, you're usually using snake case. And I tend to mix the two because I'm jumping back and forth between JavaScript and Ruby. And so I begin to mix cases. So let's go ahead and fix this one to show description. Copy that down to where we're using it. Save it, make sure everything compiles. And then let's go to our to-do list and make sure I didn't mix cases in here. And that's just, lessons learned for everybody. And you may see me make the same mistake continuously just because I'm programming in multiple different languages that have multiple different standards. All right, so it looks like we've got everything cleaned up. The next thing we want to cover really quick is the use of a third-party CSS library that provides us really good-looking styling without us needing to custom create all of our CSS. And with that, we can begin to use our CSS for our components specifically just to modify the base styles that we get from a library. There are a lot of good libraries out there like Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a common one you'll see all over the place. So we'll go ahead and open up Bootstrap. It gives you all these predefined styles, and if you go to the documentation, you can learn about all of those styles for layout, for buttons, for everything. And so it's a pretty good option. And it's one that's used all over the place. And you can also get full-blown themes that are already built with HTML that you can use inside of your applications. Another one that is out there is Bulma. Bulma is also a really good CSS framework. And it provides you a lot of features. It's not as complex as Bootstrap, but it does have a lot of good user interface components that you can use. Just coming here, you can see what it's going to look like when you style different elements like boxes and buttons and content and your delete images, icons, all kinds of stuff. So we're going to go ahead and use it. So let's go ahead and add it. Now when we use Bulma, you can install it as an NPM package and have it installed via NPM and then import it into your application. Or you should be able to find, let's see if they've got a CDN that you can pull Bulma from. Let's see if we can find a CDN for it. And the reason why there's two different ways is you can use the install Bulma and add it to your application and then import it probably in your root component. Or if you can find a CDN for it, then all you do is you add it to your index.html up here as a link to Bulma, and then it gets imported that way as well. So let's try this npm install Bulma first, and let's see if that works for us. So let's go ahead and do a Control-C to stop our server. Let's do an npm install Bulma. npm install Bulma. Wanted to make sure I spelled it correctly. Right, so now it's going to download and install Bulma. And we're going to see if we can get it just by simply importing Bulma right into our app as though it is CSS. Let's go to View Docs. There should be a Getting Started. Let's see. Here's our npm. We can install. And Let's see if it shows us how we import it or require it into our application. Looks like I have a little npm for creating a Bulma site from scratch. It's still downloading. Okay, well, while it's still downloading, let's see if we can find some more specific documentation. And let's see Bulma used in React app. Let's see if anybody's set it up before. How to set up Bulma CS framework with React. Here we go. This should be a pretty good one. So yarn add Bulma, yarn add node Css. Okay. And then it looks like we can do here we go. We can do an import. So that's the built CSS. Oh, import. app.sass is one way to do it. So maybe we need to do that. So let's do npm Bulma and then npm node Sass after we do npm Bulma. And then let's see, maybe we need to use yarn. Production build, use yarn build. Okay. So maybe we need to do these exactly. So let's Control C out of this. Let's come back here and let's do a yarn add Bulma. And then we'll do a yarn add node Sass. And we'll see if we can get this to work. Okay. Yarn add node Sass. All right. Now modify the file app.js with the following code. Oh, this is if you wanted to add their look and feel to it. Okay. Right. Next, add the file app.sass and copy the following code. There's all the Bulma right there. Okay. Oh, looks like it's done right there. Okay. So let's go ahead and we don't need to worry about adding all of this code because this is just to show what it looks like once it's built into your application. So let's add app.sass. So here we've got our app CSS. Let's go ahead and rename this. We'll just call it, actually let's not rename it. Let's leave it just in case it doesn't work. And let's just add a whole new file to our source. And let's call it app.sass. And inside of our app Sass, we'll just go ahead and copy what they told us to right here. Copy that, put it in here, save it. Now we've got our app Sass. So now let's import the Sass instead of the CSS. Now Sass is really just a CSS framework. Well, it's a, what do they call it? It's a framework that sits on top of CSS and makes CSS easier to use because you can use different variables inside of your CSS and you can import all kinds of CSS into it and then it compiles down to CSS. And so it's just a high-level abstraction on top of CSS. So let's see, the markdown has blah, blah, blah. Let's not worry about that. Well, let's go ahead and add a CSS. Indent CSS, CSS formatter. Oh, we just won't worry about that right now. Okay, we've got our CSS. So let's go into our app.js. And instead of app CSS, we're going to comment that out. And we are going to import, and we're going to do ./app.sass. Semicolon. We're going to save that. And then let's go ahead and do an npm start. And let's see if it blows up on us or if it works. And it It's thinking. Here it goes, starting the development server. Okay. It's thinking. Still thinking. And based on this little tutorial, really, it's going to go ahead and it is going to compile all of the Bulma Sass into CSS, and then that's what's going to get imported. Oh, here we go. We should be up and running. We didn't get any errors. And here you can actually see we've got some changes to our application right here. And that is because we now have added to our application the Bulma CSS has been added to our application. You can see it all right here. This is all Bulma CSS compiled from all of those Sass files. If you want to learn about Sass, I'm going to leave that up to you to go look up. But now we've got Bulma added to our application, which means now we get all of these default styles that we have here available to us. Now, because we got rid of the app.js and we're using app.sass, we're going to need to go ahead and add our app CSS back so that we can get our stuff centered again. So let's go ahead and uncomment that, and let's rerun this. And we're putting it after the app.sass in order to make sure that all of the Bulma gets run first, so all of our Bulma gets installed. And now we've got our regular app CSS, which of course put everything centered in our application. And we can see also that our text color has changed. Everything's kind of changed based on this Sass file right here. I do encourage you to go learn about Sass because it is a nifty little tool, a higher level abstraction on top of CSS. And it lets you do a lot of cool things because now we can actually change the colors right here without needing to search through all of our CSS to change those colors. We use purple, pink, brown, beige, and we can also add new colors and change stuff any way we want. But this is how we would add a custom CSS framework to our React application so that we get some default styles automatically. So let's modify some of these styles really quick just so we can see how it affected our application by importing that. So let's go to an overview here. Let's go to colors. And here, Bulma provides us with a bunch of colors that we can use and the variables that are being used inside of the Sass to change them. And let's go ahead and see what we can do to change a color to the primary. So let's go ahead and let's see if we can use primary to change a color on our text. So let's go ahead and open up our to-do item display component. And down here on this text right here, let's wrap it in a span. Go ahead and copy that, cut it, move it to the end, paste it there. And then let's add a class name to it, and then let's set it to primary. Save it. Come back to our application, reload. And it looks like it didn't change anything. So let's select one of our items here. And we have a class set to primary. And maybe Bulma requires that we do it a little differently than that. So let's go to our documentation and let's try to find text. How do we change text? Title, we got table, images, boxes, content. And let's see if content shows us how to change color. So we've got p tags. It doesn't show spans, but we do have p tags and stuff. Come down here and we've got content styles. Let's see if we can find something that would just change the color of a span. So let's go back to home and let's see if we can find a search option so we can search for a span. View the docs. Maybe we can find it easier over here. Let's do layout, containers, columns, modifiers, typography helpers. Here we go. Typography helpers. Here's the colors. All right, has text primary. So let's go ahead and change it to has text primary. Let's see if that does it. No, it still hasn't changed it. Oh, but then we remember that here in our Sass, some of these colors we modified to different colors. So is this our purple color right here? So let's hover over this. And then let's look at the styles that we've already been getting from Bulma. And we can see our has text primary is actually this purple color based on the changes that were made inside of this Sass. So let's go back to Bulma really quick. And I actually like this color right here. So I want this color to be my color. I don't want to modify that color. So I do believe in here we could actually come through, comment these out by commenting them like this, and get back the defaults that Bulma provides us. Oops. Save that. Oops, it failed to compile because it is looking for those colors. So let's uncomment those, and then let's get this actual color right here. And change it back to the color that I want for primary. Let's see what that does for us. Looks like it compiled without a problem. Now we got our colors back. All right. So here we've gone through creating custom styles for components so that we can modify components with CSS directly on those components. And they also went through the process of adding a third-party CSS framework so that we get some built-in styles that we can use on our own. Now, as we begin to iron out this to-do app and we begin to build it out based on our mock-up, we're going to begin using more and more of Bulma's built-in styles as we begin to do that. So rewatch this video if you need to. Make sure that you get Bulma in style, that you begin setting up the Sass. Now, once we're done, we're probably not going to touch this Sass file again unless we want to modify some of those base colors by modifying these CSS variables back to the colors we want. But for the most part, we're not going to touch this Sass file because this Sass file is really set up just to import all of the Bulma base CSS that we want so that we can get all of these helpers that come with Bulma. And we're going to begin using all of these layouts and modifiers and columns and forms as we begin to build, especially the form down here for creating a new to-do item. Now, I think this video has been long enough, so we're going to go ahead and stop right there, having implemented custom CSS as well as implementing a third-party CSS library so that we get all those fancy things done for us.